Hi everyone, today we'll be talking about the most famous accommodation platform in the 21st century, Airbnb. We will go through the history of Airbnb, provide some background, then we will discuss some challenges faced by Airbnb within the industry, as well as the challenges faced by the entire industry. We will end the presentation with some recommendations for Airbnb's future. Airbnb was founded by Brian Chesky and Joe Gabriel in 2007. They started by renting 3 Airbnbs they had in their apartment through a website to advertise the offer, focusing on the local convention that caused the demand to exceed the local hotel supply. After realizing that they were able to attract customers from a range of demographics, they expanded upon this business idea after getting together with Nathan Blachaczik. By 2008, the founders finished a final version of their site and started to meet with investors. However, investors were not convinced of their business idea. Out of the 15 investors they were introduced to, 8 of them rejected the trio and the other 7 just dropped off the radar. At one point, cash was so tight at Airbnb that the founders resorted to maxing out their credit cards and took on credit card after credit card to finance the business. Their first break came only during the 2008 South by Southwest Festival, where they got 40 people to list on Airbnb. They got their publicity out by relying on block coverage, starting with the smaller blocks, then using these numbers to appeal to the larger ones. Chesky also stayed as a guest in order to reach out and learn more about the customer experience during this event. After an awkward payment process during the stay, Airbnb then started to facilitate payment in order to remove obstacles and foster an environment of trust. After their initial success, they quickly moved on to target the Democratic National Convention and the Republican National Convention, but they did not have enough budget for publicity. The trio then created cereal boxes for publicity, leveraging on the Obama versus McCain hype. These were to be given to hosts for their renters during the event, but was instead launched as a collectible retailing at $40 each. These cereal boxes quickly became viral after they had sent it to major mass media and news outlets, which created viral publicity for Airbnb and immense demand for the cereal boxes. This publicity stunt drew the attention of Paul Graham of Y Combinator, a Silicon Valley accelerator. He originally wanted to leave, but after convincing them to start a bank. But instead, he invested because of their 10 times markup on their cereal boxes. They were invited to join his program, and Airbnb graduated with their company in the green. Y Combinator advised them to focus on small, difficult to scale activities, as this knowledge about users cannot be easily scaled and copied by competitors. These are the activities which they had been pursuing all along, getting bloggers to promote Airbnb and developing a group of loyal renters and hosters. They also reinforced the ideal of prioritizing user experience by having videos showcasing user experiences and having the founders garner feedback when they stayed with hosts to quickly iterate and update the platform. Airbnb also realized that hosts were using low-quality camera photos to showcase their properties after moving to New York on the advice of Graham. Being trained in design principles, the founders invested in professional photography equipment at high cost and visited the hosts individually to help them best photograph their property. They quickly realized that listings with such high-quality photos, verified address, and detailed directions quickly became very popular, and the revenue from these properties quickly increased. In creating this tried and tested process with high initial costs, they quickly learned the best way to upgrade all their listings and outsource this know-how to professional photographers that have visited 10,000 hosts around the United States to educate them on the importance of good photos.
What happened right after the photography is perhaps something which every entrepreneur can dream of, the critical mass rocket. The photography, together with them always going out of their way to make their customers happy, helped them reach the point of exponential growth. Network effect was also an important factor in this. As more customers came, more hosts were willing to list their rooms in Airbnb, and this further attracted customers in a self-reinforcing cycle. As Chesky explains, we start with the perfect experience and then work backwards. That's how we're going to continue to be successful. It all starts with an ideal experience. With a revenue fast approaching $100 million, they caught the attention of high-profile VCs, as well as Jeff Bezos. They raised $112 million and were valued at $1 billion for their 2011 fundraising, officially becoming a unicorn. With their presence in US relatively well established already, they started looking for opportunities abroad. These successes were not all sweet. Airbnb had to deal with numerous legal battles and unruly guests plaguing the home sharing platform. To tackle that, Airbnb decided to do a rebranding in 2014 to shed their previous image of being a nuisance. The new logo, called the Bello, was supposed to foster a sense of belonging, but was immediately criticized for looking something more like genitalia instead. Their problem persisted despite this move. Today, Airbnb has expanded to over 190 countries and 34,000 cities. They are looking at IPO as their next steps. However, amidst coronavirus concerns, we are not sure if this event will happen this year.
Let us now move on to Airbnb's challenges. Airbnb has enjoyed tremendous success, growing to a valuation of $38 billion in just 11 years. However, Airbnb's growth is not without challenges. These include legislation, copycats, powerful incumbents fighting back, and general industry headwinds. A significant proportion of Airbnb's listing comes from major cities worldwide, and these are dominated by cities such as Paris, New York, and London. However, with the increasing rental prices in these cities, Airbnb now faces legislative roadblocks, threatening to undermine the sustainability of its business model. Cities such as New York, Los Angeles, and Paris are clamping down on Airbnb listings in response to outcry from native residents against rising housing prices. We can see from the figures that in a mere 2 years, the regulations have taken a toll on the listings in these major cities. Airbnb is also threatening the business of major hotel chains, slowly eating away at their market share by providing vacationers with alternative choices. A study by Morgan Stanley found that 49% of users of the home sharing industry used it as an alternative to a traditional hotel. A study also found that Airbnb accounted for approximately 5.5% of all paid US lodging demand in 2018, and this figure is set to increase. Now, the big hotel chains are fighting back against Airbnb's growth into their market, and the main prongs of their assault include lobbying politicians and state attorney generals to reduce the number of Airbnb hosts, funding studies to show that Airbnb is filled with people who are quietly running hotels out of residential buildings, and highlighting how Airbnb hosts do not collect hotel taxes and are subject to the same safety and security regulations that hotel operations must follow. In New York, the association began working with local affiliates to lobby state legislators and the governor's office to adopt steeper fines for New York City hosts that list Airbnb in violation of local law, a move that hotel operators had hoped would help increase their business. At the same time, starting May last year, Marriott began offering accommodations in about 2,000 high-end homes throughout 100 markets across the US, Europe, and Latin America. Now, as Airbnb expanded rapidly over the past decade, it has lost a bit of its original character, diluting its brand image and dabbling in everything from homes to boats to tree houses. The service of connecting property owners and guests is easily commoditized. While there are significant network effects in this industry, users are not limited to listing their properties on a single website, and it's difficult to carve out a sustainable economic mode. Because of its easily replicable business model, competitors from all over the world are jostling for market share, oftentimes with similar business models but simply slightly more favorable pricing structures for both hosts and guests. It is a common business strategy to start with a small, passionate consumer base rather than a large, nonchalant one. Once a competitor carves out a niche market for themselves and dominates it, it is difficult to enter and steal market share from them.
With the rise of the sharing economy, Airbnb has grown into one of the biggest players in the peer-to-peer accommodation market. However, as Airbnb continues to scale operations, local communities have started to voice their displeasure from the excessive noise, wild parties, and the uncomfortable presence of strangers around the neighborhood. These reasons have partially contributed to the government's imposing regulations on Airbnb renters so as to safeguard a conducive living environment for the other residents. Major cities such as Berlin, San Francisco, and New York have imposed rules to control and minimize the potential for disturbance creation from Airbnb guests by requiring that renters are registered or have hosts staying in with their guests. Such regulations, if implemented heavily, directly restricts the scalability of Airbnb's operations into these areas, effectively crippling the network effects gained from having more hosts and renters, as hosts will now think twice before subletting their apartments. Furthermore, Bad experiences with inconsiderate guests leaving trashed homes, as well as complaints from neighbours, further reduce the willingness for people to consider renting out their apartments through Airbnb. To make matters worse, Airbnb also faces accusations of driving up the already high rental prices in many cities. Astronomical rental rates in major US cities are hollowing out local communities by forcing up rents and limiting housing availability for people seeking long-term rentals. In the Bay Area, around 70% of tech workers for top tech companies can't afford to buy a house near where they work. Many of these people are high-skilled talents such as engineers, product managers, and data scientists who are able to make rent but can't afford to buy a home. Furthermore, the higher earning potential from Airbnb renters, together with the knowledge that most renters in such cities are able to afford higher rents, have incentivized hosts to aggressively drive up rental prices. In fact, statistics have shown that up to 20% change in monthly rental prices in New York can be attributed to Airbnb. To quote a Barcelona Airbnb host, if you can earn $3,000 a week by renting to tourists instead of just $800, there's clearly a temptation to do so. The influence of this so-called Airbnb effect on local housing markets have grown into a significant cause for concern, particularly when looking at its impact on housing stocks, prices, and communities. Research conducted by the Harvard Business Review across the US found that Airbnb is having a detrimental impact on housing stock, as it encourages local landlords to move their properties away from long-term rentals into the short-term rental market. With Airbnb listings raising the rents, it slowly increases the value of an area to the detriment of local residents, many of whom are pushed out due to financial constraints. Coupled with the rising income inequality common in such developed cities, it is no wonder that there is increasing displeasure against Airbnb's operations. We should also note that as Airbnb expands to more than 220 countries, scalability issues are starting to surface and dilute the original Airbnb experience as promised by the founders, lowering trust between hosts and renters within the ecosystem. In 2016, Airbnb had nearly 80 million stays. However, close to 7% of these stays were problematic. This equates to 2 million ruined trips, with a majority of complaints arising from last-minute cancellations as well as host scams. Customer service standards have also dropped over the years, with 82% of complaints mentioning customer service as a problem. Such problems threaten and undermine the tripartite trust between Airbnb, the host, and the renters required for the sharing economy to thrive. It is clear that Airbnb needs to improve on the quality of experience by both hosts and renters when using the Airbnb platform in order to retain market loyalty and to reap the full benefits of network effects in the ecosystem.
Alright. Okay, so now I will be introducing the trends and challenges in the industry as a whole. Airbnb is in the hospitality and tourism industry. These two industries have large overlaps, but generally speaking, the tourism industry has to do with local and international tourists coming with the purpose of recreation and entertainment. Some services usually associated with the tourism industry includes travel agents, vehicle rentals, and tour operators. The hospitality industry, on the other hand, is concerned with services related to leisure, but not limited to tourists. Examples include accommodations and food and drinks. It is worth noting that these two industries complement each other well. A well-established hospitality industry attracts more tourists, and tourism brings about more business for the hospitality services. Airbnb sits squarely in the hospitality industry with its main business of providing bed and breakfast to their customers. Airbnb experiences seek to connect tourists with services like tour programs and adventures, effectively providing tourism services. Hence, Airbnb belongs in both industries. Before this, we have discussed the intra-industry challenges that Airbnb has faced, such as its competitors and scalability issues. From here on, we will be discussing trends that have impacted these two industries as a whole in the recent years, as well as some industry-wide challenges. After that, we will discuss our recommendations, taking into account Airbnb's intra-industry challenges as well as the trends and challenges facing the entire industry. Industry-wide trends include the increasing ease of tourism, as well as a shift in consumer preferences. We will then discuss the impacts of the coronavirus on the hospitality and tourism industries, followed by the digital platform industry. There has been an immense increase in the ease of tourism in the recent years, with the advances in technology, in particular the internet and cell phones, as well as globalization. The advance of the internet brings about information sharing to an extent never seen before. This means that it is more easy than ever to plan trips. There are 5 stages to the journey of traveling: inspiration, planning, booking, experiencing, and sharing. The sharing of information has made it a lot easier for the inspiration, planning, booking, and sharing phases. The social media age has allowed users to share their travel experiences with their social circles easily. This in turn makes it easy for people to get inspired to go for a trip. With sites like Instagram and YouTube, there are many people that make travel vlogs frequently, and many people consume these for leisure. This helps to inspire people to want to take the trip. When planning and booking a trip, the availability of information in sites like Google, TripAdvisor, and Lonely Planet helps a person to find out more about travel destination and better plan their activities. Expedia, Kayak, Priceline, and Google Flights are some websites that make it easy to make accommodations and flights bookings. In addition to the sites mentioned earlier, the age of internet and mobile phones have brought the convenience of having the internet with us everywhere we go. Mobile phone apps like Google Maps and Google Translate makes it easy for people to get around the foreign destinations when traveling. This makes it easy for the experiencing phase of the travel journey. We see that the boom of the internet and mobile phones in recent times has made every step of the travel journey, inspiration, planning, booking, experiencing, and sharing much easier. This means that the transaction cost of traveling as a whole has gone down, which will encourage more people to travel. The numbers show us that there has indeed been a meteoric rise in global tourism, in large part due to the lowering of transaction costs due to the internet. We see that Europe has been enjoying the most international tourist arrivals since the 1950s. We see from the graph that the number of people going to other regions, Africa, Middle East, Asia Pacific, and Americas, have been steadily increasing. In particular, international tourism in Asia Pacific seem to be growing quickly, and the relatively small number of tourists going to Africa and Middle East indicate that there is huge potential for growth in terms of tourism in these regions. These trends are important as they can give an indication of potential future growth and thus can help players in the industry identify opportunities and make strategic decisions.
Explored how certain regions in the world like Africa and the Asia Pacific will likely receive more international tourists in the future. This leads us nicely to our next point of shifts in consumer preferences. One thing we can agree on about consumer behavior is that it is constantly changing. In our less technologically savvy past, generic tour packages and cookie-cutter travel itineraries were considered to be the only way for most people to travel because all the research and planning were already done for customers. Fast forward to the start of the new millennium, with the advent of the internet and search engines, consumers started to look towards alternative forms of travel, one which they could tailor their preferences to. While the emphasis on personalization still exists, millennials are bored of the usual destinations which everyone talks about. Ride a horse in Mongolia? Check. Scale the pyramids of Egypt? Been there, done that. What symbolizes a person who is well-traveled from the rest is in the rarity of their destinations. Skyscanner in 2017 recorded a sharp increase in search volume by Singaporeans for destinations such as Kathmandu, which is up by 106%, Okinawa, which is up by 121%, and Amritsar, which is up by 217%. The study cited that the main reasons for these trends were due to the cultural and historical significance of the destination, as well as its exoticism. One interesting finding was that the wanderlust was not age-dependent. Differentiated experiences called out to both young millennials and baby boomers alike. Previously, we talked about countries receiving international tourists. On the flip side, there are trends with regards to the outgoing international tourists. China and India are among the most populous countries in the world. China, in particular, has been enjoying strong economic growth in recent years. There has been a sharp rise in the number of Chinese international tourists, whether for good or bad. We have heard news of Chinese tourists displaying undesirable behavior overseas to the embarrassment of the nation, and these includes destruction of sceneries or general uncouth behavior. While unpleasant, the increase in coverage of these news is indicative of the increase in the number of Chinese tourists. India, on the other hand, has been experiencing strong economic growth in the recent years, as can be seen in the graph. With its strong growth and expected continued growth in the Indian economy, we can expect an increase in the number of Indian international tourists. These charts here show the number of outgoing international tourists, with India on the left and China on the right. According to the United Nations World Trade Organization, India is predicted to have 50 million outbound tourists in 2020. China has been the largest source market for international tourism in the world since 2012 and remains one of the fastest growing demographics. This serves to demonstrate the trend of increased number of outgoing tourists from these two countries. This is an important trend to take note of, as these demographics have their specific preferences, and if they make up a large percentage of international tourism, it would mean that the consumer preferences of all tourists as a whole would have shifted. One more thing to note, that while these graphs show the rise in international tourism, we cannot forget the domestic tourism that is also increasing. China and India are huge countries with massive landmass, and the domestic tourism numbers are rising together with the international tourism numbers. This represents a good opportunity for Airbnb to tap into.
One of the major challenges and shocks faced recently by the hospitality industry is the coronavirus. People have stopped traveling, and the demand for bookings have decreased by at least 50% in most areas. And we know that this effect is likely to be much larger in the upcoming period. I'll give a quick analysis of how the novel coronavirus has affected the demand and supply on Airbnb's platform, the financial impact, their response policies, and how the community has responded. On the supply side, there hasn't been much of a change from January to March, as most hosts probably do not want to lose their income stream and hence are not closing off their rentals. On the demand side, the results are much more significant. As you can see from the sharp vertical line, there's a strong decrease in revenue around the January and February period, as the world starts to register the significance of events happening in China, and guests start to consider their own health and safety before traveling. And all of these are the cities that are most affected by the coronavirus, and there's a very, very sharp decrease in revenue. Over here you can see the exact numbers of some of these cities, and the number of bookings have decreased by at least 50% across the entire globe, with Beijing registering a 96% decrease from bookings in January to bookings in March, which is basically a decrease from 40,000 to only 1,500. Here we have more data on the impacts of the coronavirus. Bookings have been down in Asia by 95%, followed by 75% in Europe, which is actually the company's largest market, and then 50% in the US. This is a huge financial impact for Airbnb. And with the power of hindsight, we know now in the current day that these numbers are bound to decrease even more. So back then, these numbers were calculated where urban spots were hit much more than leisure areas. And that was because people were afraid to travel to densely populated cities. But right now, we know that all places, including leisure areas, have already been on lockdown, with governors telling their local businesses and residents not to accommodate travelers because of the danger. And so this data is less relevant, and in fact the numbers only show a fraction of the real extent of damage to the Airbnb economy. So early on in the virus, Airbnb's initial response was only for a mandatory 100% refund from heavily hit places such as China, South Korea, and Italy. All other refunds were based on the flexibility of the host. Now this left guests feeling frustrated and uncertain because they had to decide between the safety of their family or losing the money they had already spent on accommodation if the host didn't refund them. So because of this, Airbnb then pushed for 100% refund worldwide, which means that a host has to lose their entire income deposit whenever a guest decides to cancel. Now this of course resulted in a massive decrease in revenue for both Airbnb and the host, as well as the hosts feeling unhappy that they were forced into this 100% refund policy without them having been consulted. Some hosts even took to social platforms, to public platforms, to complain that they had been abandoned. And the real question here is, was it a socially responsible move? So we know from hindsight that the decision that Airbnb made is actually a very socially responsible decision, because it probably helped to mitigate the virus's spread by reducing the amount of travel that people were making. So what we think here is that Airbnb could possibly have rolled out an announcement and implemented the decision in a more gradual manner, such that allowances were made for hosts to be able to accept these changes. In the most recent update, pretty much yesterday, Airbnb has actually pledged more help for their hosts. A host relief fund of 250 million and a super host relief fund of 10 million have been set up, and it's been allowed to offset about 25% of normal cancellation fees. Hosts can apply for grants of up to $5,000, and Airbnb has also worked hard to allow hosts to qualify for benefits from the recent US stimulus bill. But the main question here is, does this really help? In fact, should Airbnb even help? Is Airbnb obliged to lessen the risk of a property owner? So interestingly, more experienced and older hosts on the platform have said that Airbnb has no obligation to them, and they understand the policies that Airbnb is coming up with, while younger and more recent hosts have panicked at the sudden disruption of their income and expect Airbnb to do more. One interesting fact is that the founders have already pledged to take zero pay and to stop all marketing for the year as part of their committed efforts to help curb the coronavirus spread by reducing travel. So next up, we move on to a more general challenge faced by the platform industry, which is essentially what Airbnb is. So there are four main challenges here, and the first one is the competition policies and regulation. So what we mean by this is, how can large platforms prevent themselves from abusing their power? Platforms which have done so previously in the past and incurred the government's anger include Facebook in its Supreme Court case and Microsoft's antitrust case all the way back in 2003. The next challenge is multi-homing, which is a scenario where users make the same listing on multiple platforms. Just like how a driver can list on both Uber and Lyft, what's to stop a host from listing their property on both Booking.com and Airbnb.com? And this will heavily affect the exclusivity of the Airbnb platform, which then decreases the switching costs. The next challenge is bridging networks. This is when another platform uses its resources and networks to enter the current market as competition. We know Facebook recently started Facebook dating to capitalize on its network of users and the data that it has. So what if one day Facebook started its own version of Airbnb? The question here is whether Airbnb has any strategies in place to prevent users from migrating over to Facebook's version of Airbnb. And the last one is growth pressures, right? After all the low-hanging fruit has been snapped up, after Airbnb has moved past its early growth stage, how can it continue to grow its income stream and to maintain its revenue streams? Strategies have included the merger and acquisition of young companies, as listed here on this slide. For example, in the bottom right corner we have Hotel Tonight, which is a service that helps people make last-minute booking reservations, and they were recently acquired by Airbnb to ensure that Airbnb can have a more extensive value chain and provide end-to-end services for all its guests.
Okay, we will now discuss some of the possible steps which Airbnb can consider to combat these internal and external challenges. Firstly, Airbnb can consider providing cultural-centric experiences to address the trends of increased tourism from certain demographics. For instance, a host can possibly be certified for providing a Chinese culture-centric experience to suit the increasing number of Chinese tourists. This will end up improving the experience in a hard-to-scale way, which builds up another competency that will be hard to copy. Airbnb has previously showed capabilities of reaching out to individual hosts to improve the overall experience, as seen by the photography training they brought to each host. These activities are undoubtedly valuable and hard to scale, which is thus hard to copy and fits Airbnb's playbook well.
Airbnb was its focus on consumer experience. Airbnb came in at a time where the changing consumer demand aligned with Airbnb's business model. Whether Airbnb can continue to uphold its relevance in the travel industry depends on how accurately Airbnb predicts consumer trends and how effectively they meet them. With the shift towards exoticism in the travel industry as mentioned earlier, Airbnb can focus on places without an established tourism market. Market research on exotic travel destinations can be conducted, and the places with the most potential can be developed by Airbnb into new tourism spots for customers. These will include places which are generally untouched by tourism and yet have a lot of cultural significance in them. As a new entrant into these markets, Airbnb can also work with locals to ensure that they have the most authentic experience provided. A successful entry into these locations will enable Airbnb to provide bespoke experiences and package them to consumers. While the initial investment costs may be high, this method allows Airbnb to enter a virtually untapped market. Venturing into a large number of such markets would be analogous to the long-tail phenomena, which was mentioned in other case studies earlier in this class, where Airbnb's low marginal costs can target these less popular areas easily, whereas competitors such as hotels will find it much harder to enter the market. Airbnb can also use their wealth of data on consumers and homeowners to provide customized insurance pricing plans. Data analytics and artificial intelligence can use data to identify the risk levels and provide cheaper insurance rates to those deemed as safer travelers.